You're not bringing that thing inside. The ranger's voice cracked like ice snapping in the wind. Marla didn't answer. She stood in the open doorway, her breath trembling in the air, eyes fixed on the shape staggering through the snow. It wasn't a storm, just the kind of heavy, endless flurry that silenced everything. No birds, no distant trees groaning, no wind even, just the snowfall. And that sound, a low, dragging scrape, and the hollow creak of wood on frozen earth. The dog was enormous, more wolf than domestic breed, its fur matted with sleet, eyes glassy with strain. It was pulling a baby crib by its mouth, dragging the wheels crooked through the white, not rolling, dragging. The crib was old, not just weathered, but ancient in its shape. Tall, arched headboard, iron clasps on rotting oak. It looked carved, not built, handcrafted, like it had survived something else before today. Marla stepped barefoot into the snow before she realized it, ignoring the sting. "Where did you come from?" she whispered. There was something inside the crib. She could see the shape swaddled in damp cloths, not moving, not crying. And yet the dog, shaking now, kept pulling. Not toward the cabin. Away from something. Its muscles tensed every few steps, eyes flicking behind it. Always behind. As if the forest were breathing down its spine. "Don't touch it," the ranger said again. He stood behind her, rifle slack in his grip, but his posture wasn't angry. It was afraid. "That's not our dog, and that's not our child." Marla ignored him. Her instincts were louder than the logic. She knelt slowly, until she was level with the dog's face. Its muzzle quivered with exhaustion, and when she reached to touch it, the dog didn't flinch. Its body collapsed beside the crib like it had been holding on to that last thread of movement for miles. Its flank rose and fell, breathing shallow and rapid, while one paw stayed hooked on the crib leg like it refused to let go. The silence cracked not with sound, but with knowing. That sudden awareness you get before lightning strikes, or before a wrong door creaks open. The forest behind her, them bare-limbed, dense, ancient, felt like it was watching. Marla stood again, snow coating her hair, and looked past the path the dog had come from. The prints were messy, not clear paw prints. Something else had crossed there too, something larger, longer, heavier. Inside the crib, under layers of soaked wool and tattered silk, something shifted. Marla leaned closer. It was a baby. Tiny, silent eyes shut tight. No sounds, no tears, but breathing barely. She scooped the child up into her arms without thinking. The weight was wrong, too light, and the fabric clung to her skin with a wet, cold that felt deeper than snow. Colder, older. What if it followed them? The ranger asked, now stepping down the porch slowly. Whatever the dog was running from, what if it's still coming? Marla didn't answer. Her arms tightened around the child as she looked back at the still trembling dog, and beyond it into the tree line where the shadows didn't move quite right. She didn't know what the dog had saved this baby from, but she knew, deep in the marrow of her bones, that it hadn't been natural. Something else had stirred in that forest, and whatever it wasn't finished. The snow kept falling, the forest didn't breathe, and behind them, buried in the bark of an ancient pine, something had scratched, not clawed, etched a long, deliberate mark that had never been there yesterday. The cabin door groaned shut behind them, sealing out the cold but not the fear. Inside, the fire had long since burned down to coals, casting more shadow than warmth. Marla crouched near the hearth, the baby wrapped in dry wool now, but still silent in her arms. Too still, too quiet, no cries, not even a whimper. Its skin was pale, almost bluish at the lips, but the chest still rose and fell in the faintest rhythm, alive, just barely. The dog had collapsed just past the doorway. It hadn't moved since, eyes half open, sides heaving. Its fur had begun to thaw in clumps, revealing old scars beneath long, precise slashes that looked neither like bite nor blade. The ranger stood over it, one hand clenched around the rifle grip like a habit, the other tracing the edge of his jaw as if trying to remember something he shouldn't. "Marla," he finally said, voice low. "I think I've seen that dog before. Years ago, South Range." She turned, startled. "You said it wasn't ours." "It wasn't, but I saw it near the tree line once. Winter patrol, maybe 6-7 years back. It was dragging something back then too, not a crib." He paused. "A bone." She looked at him, waiting for more, but he didn't go on. He stared at the dog, haunted. Thunder rumbled faintly, though the skies hadn't changed. Snow still fell, unbroken and slow, like time itself had thickened. Marla stood and moved to the table, laying the child down gently, wrapping it tighter. Her hands were shaking now, though not from cold. Something in her gut had begun to twist, instinct and dread pulling at the same thread. She glanced again toward the window. The footprints the dog had left were almost gone already, erased by snowfall. Whatever path it had taken, it would vanish within the hour. And the markings on the trithos, strange, deliberate scratches, they hadn't come from any animal, not claw marks, not natural erosion. They looked written. The ranger finally stepped forward, eyes darting between the crib and the child. "That what?" he said, nodding the crib. "It's not just old. That's black birch, that kind of carving that's not local." Marla narrowed her eyes. "Then what is it?" He hesitated. "There used to be stories. from the elders about offerings left in cribs and pushed into the forest line. Not babies, not usually, sometimes dolls, wrapped in cloth, left to be taken by whatever lived in the woods before us. He laughed dryly, as if trying to shake off the weight of what he'd just said. But you know, stories. The fire cracked sharply, and the dog stirred. It lifted its head, slowly, painfully. Then, in one sudden movement, it stood, limbs trembling, spine bowed. Its eyes were not on them. They were fixed on the door. Its lips curled not in a growl, but something stranger. A whimper that caught in its throat. A plea. Then came the knock. Not loud, not violent, just wrong. A single tap, too high on the doorframe for a human hand. Marla stepped back instinctively, hand reaching for the baby. The ranger swung the rifle to his shoulder, heart in his mouth. There was silence. Then another knock. The dog moved first. It limped forward and placed itself between the crib and the door. Not barking, not snarling, just watching. Then a sound drifted through the cracks in the walls, too soft to be wind, too steady to be human. It was a kind of chanting, or humming, distant but deliberate, like breath across bone, like something ancient trying to remember the shape of a song. The ranger stepped toward the window, careful. He peeled back the curtain and stared into the storm. Nothing, he whispered, but I can feel it. It's close. The baby stirred. Not a cry, just a shift. Its eyes opened. Marla gasped. The pupils weren't right. Too wide, swallowing almost the entire iris. The child looked up at her, not blankly, but knowingly. And then it smiled. The cabin groaned with flexing like ribs. The temperature dropped so fast the windows frosted in seconds. The fire hissed as if choking. Then the voice came. Not through the door, not from outside. It came from beneath them. It was never meant to leave. The floor creaked. Marla backed up, clutching the child tighter. Did you hear that? The ranger nodded, pale. We're standing on something buried. He rushed to the corner and grabbed the hatchet off the wall. With the butt end, he struck the center of the floorboards once, twice. On the third hit, the wood splintered. And beneath it was not dirt, it was stone, carved, blackened with age, and etched with the same symbols they'd seen in the tree outside. Symbols older than language, symbols that warned, not welcomed. Marla looked at the baby in her arms, whose smile had faded now. It stared down at the stone through the floor as if it had been waiting to see it again. The dog howled, then not at them, not at the door, but at the very floor. A deep, mournful sound that filled the room with something far colder than fear. It wasn't warning them, it was grieving. And somewhere, outside, the humming stopped. Not because it was over, because something had just arrived. The cold seeped through the cabin floor like a tide, numbing from the soles up. Marla stood frozen above the shattered boards, the child cradled tight to her chest. The symbols etched in the stone beneath weren't just carved, they were deep, precise, and eerily clean. No dust, no moss, as though the slab had been placed only hours ago. But the wear in the surrounding floor told a different story. This house had been standing for decades. The ranger ran his gloved fingers along the markings, his mouth opening like he might speak, but nothing came. Not even a whisper. His hand flinched back like he'd been stung. What is this place? Marla's voice cracked as she spoke. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the black stone with eyes that looked suddenly years older. I think we built on top of something. Sacred, or maybe sealed is the better word. He looked up at her. Do you know who owned this cabin before you? Marla shook her head. Inherited. From a cousin. Never met him. Just a name in a will. The ranger blinked. Was the name Ashwood? Marla froze. Yeah, Jacob Ashwood. The color drained from the ranger's face. He stood abruptly, backing away from the exposed slab. He disappeared up here in the 90s. They never found his body. Just pieces of his furniture burned and scattered through the woods. No one ever lived here again. It was passed around in probate court for years. He turned to the window. Again, I never realized this was that place. Marla gripped the baby tighter. Her fingers tingled from cold and panic. She looked down at the child, expecting that eerie knowing expression again, but its eyes were shut now, sleeping, breathing, soft and slow, like none of this touched it. Another sound broke the silence, this time not a knock, a scratching, not animal rhythmic, fingernails or something like them moving in a circle around the perimeter of the cabin, not hurried, not curious, claiming the Doug bristled and rose again, every bone in its body screaming against movement. It pushed toward the door with a whine so guttural it sounded human, protective, not afraid. And Marla understood, in a quiet way, that the animal wasn't guarding them, it was guarding the child. What if it's not a baby? She whispered aloud. The ranger looked at her sharply. What are you saying? I mean, what if it was one once? But now she trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought. But it hung between them like breath in the cold. The fire snapped violently, sparks showering the stone hearth, and then without warning the lantern above them blinked, once and died. Darkness swallowed the room. The scratching stopped. A silence deeper than before pressed in, as if the air itself had been replaced. Marla's heart pounded against her ribs. The ranger flicked his flashlight on, and the narrow beam shook in his trembling hand. Then a voice echoed through the darkness, not muffled by walls or distance, not shouted, whispered, but from inside the cabin. "Return what was taken." The beam of the flashlight swept across the room. Nothing, no figures, no movement, just the still body of the dog, now bristling in the far corner, teeth bared at, nothing visible. Marla turned, and in that moment, her eyes caught the old mirror by the hearth. And in the mirror, the cabin was not empty. There was a shape standing in the far corner behind them, not reflected in light, only in glass. She gasped and pointed. The ranger wheeled around, rifle raised, but nothing was there. "Behind us," she breathed in the reflection. He swung back to the mirror, and then he saw it tall, emaciated, drenched in black bristles or bark, something unnatural. Its limbs hung too long, eyes not glowing, but hollow, like sockets bored through ice. "Don't look away," the ranger said, inching toward the mirror with agonizing care. "If it's only visible through reflection, then maybe it's bound by sight." Marla's gaze locked with the image in the mirror, her throat dry as dust. The child stirred again, pressing its tiny face to her collarbone. Then, from deep within the cabin's foundation, came a sound that no living thing should make. Not a growl, not a scream, a calling low and layered, as if generations of mouths were speaking through one unbroken breath. "Return what was taken." The voice repeated, louder now. "Or stay until the seal breaks." Marla's eyes snapped to the stone slab under the broken floorboards. It wasn't just a warning, it was a lock, a seal to something buried. Something that wasn't supposed to be disturbed, and now it knew. The child was gone. The ranger turned to her, frantic. "We can't stay. We have to get it away from here." "But what if that wakes it up more?" She shot back. "The dog didn't bring it here by accident. It was escaping that." She gestured at the mirror, which now flickered. The figure, in the reflection, stepped forward, though the room behind them remained empty. "No," she said, voice low. "It's not trying to take the child back." "What then?" She stared at the baby. Its face was serene, unbothered. But when she looked down again, she saw something new, a faint glowing sigil on its chest. Not drawn, branded, the same symbol that had been etched into the slab beneath the floor. The baby was the seal. The realization hit like a falling tree. Not a prisoner, a lock, living, breathing containment. The forest hadn't been keeping it in, the child had, and now the lock was out, warm in her arms, blinking softly in firelight. Outside, the wind picked up for the first time. But it wasn't a storm, it was a breath, something massive inhaling, and just beyond the tree line, the ancient thing began to walk, finally freed. The cabin walls pulsed with the pressure of something breathing just beyond them, slow, cavernous, inhales that seemed to bend the timber inward with every rise. Marla clutched the child against her chest, her heart thudding in sync with the deep rhythm outside. The glowing sigil on the baby's chest still shimmered faintly, pulsing with a cold light that didn't cast a shadow. The ranger had lowered his rifle, not out of surrender, but because aim had become meaningless. Whatever was out there, whatever the seal had once held, it wasn't flesh and blood, not anymore. He moved to the window again, but this time didn't part the curtain. He just stood there, listening. Every sense was tuned not to sight, but to presence. Then a second breath came. Closer, wet and thick and ancient, like the forest itself had a mouth and was remembering how to use it. "Marla," he said quietly, "if that baby really was the lock, then whatever's out there has waited a very long time for this." She didn't reply. Her gaze was locked on the child, who had begun to twitch slightly in her arms. Not in pain, more like stirring from a deep, unnatural sleep. Its eyes opened slowly, not wide this time, but narrowed, focused. The irises now held threads of that same light, swirling like embers in a black tide. Marla looked down at the floorboard again. The etched stone was almost humming now, vibrating softly underfoot, and more disturbing still. The carvings were changing, not erasing but shifting, as if trying to rewrite their purpose, like the lock was trying, desperately, to reform itself. And failing. The dog growled low from the corner, still facing the front door. It hadn't moved in minutes, but its ears pinned back now, its haunches tensed. Then it rose, slowly, trembling, and stepped toward Marla. It nudged her thigh once, gently, and then let out a sound that broke her completely, a long, soft cry. It wasn't a growl, not a warning, it was the sound of begging. The dog looked into her eyes, and for the first time, she realized this creature had known. It had known the cost of dragging that crib through miles of ice. It had chosen to carry the lock out of the ground it had been guarding. "Why would it do that?" she whispered. The ranger stepped beside her, because something down there must have started waking up first. The realization settled like ash. The seal hadn't failed because it was removed. It was running. The ancient force below had begun to stir, and the dog, or whatever it had once been, had chosen to break the only rule it was born to obey. Protect the world, not the lock. The baby's fingers twitched now, clutching at Marla's sweater. The symbol on its chest pulsed once, brighter, and then the mirror shattered, not with violence but with force, as if the reflection itself couldn't hold the weight of what approached. Glass rained across the cabin floor, each piece ringing like tiny bells. The ranger raised his rifle again, now more ritual than readiness. Then the door creaked, opened, bent. A hand or something shaped like a hand pressed gently against the thick timber. But the wood didn't break. It rotted beneath the touch, the grain blackening and curling inwards like burned paper. "We can't let it in," Marla said, stepping back. "Even if it's already in the mirror, in the walls. We can't let it inside us." The ranger turned to her, desperation in his face. "Then what? We can't kill it. We can't outrun it. We can finish what the dog started." He stared. She knelt and laid the child gently back into the crib. The ancient wood, warped and soaked from the journey, seemed to draw in her breath. She looked down at the baby, not crying, not resisting, just watching. "What if it wants to go back?" she said softly, "not because it's evil, but because it's bound." The dog limped closer, resting its head on the crib's edge. Its body trembled from exhaustion, yet it looked ready to pull again if asked. Marla swallowed the knot in her throat. "We take it back," she said. "Back to the place beneath. Back to the stone." The ranger hesitated. "You want to lower a living seal back into that thing's nest?" "No," she said, eyes steady. "I want to seal the nest with what it needs." It looked like he might argue, but the doorframe gave a final groan. The smell of rot curled into the air, so thick it burned the back of their throats. No more time together. They lifted the crib, Marla at the head, the ranger at the base. The dog led them to the broken floorboard, where the carved stone now glowed with the faint, dreadful beauty of something eternal. The runes continued to writhe, attempting to stabilize Dot as they lowered the crib down onto the slab. The wind outside stopped, not easy, stopped, as if the whole world held its breath. The moment the crib touched the stone, the glow flared. The sigil on the child's chest blazed in unison. A low hum began, first from beneath, then from within the walls, then from every grain of the cabin itself. The child exhaled. Not in fear, in release. Then the symbols snapped back into place, locking into their original form, and the cabin shook. The force rippled outward in a low, pulsing wave, like thunder rolled backward. The thing outside screamed, not through the door, not through any mouth, but from the air itself. The cry fractured the remaining windows, split the lanterns from their hooks, and knocked them all to their knees. Then silence, true, absolute silence. The light faded from the sigil. The crib sat still. The dog lay beside it, unmoving but not in death, just at peace. Marla pulled herself up. The ranger lay sprawled beside her, stunned. The air was warm again. She crawled to the crib. The baby's chest had stopped glowing. Its eyes were closed, breathing but deep in something heavier than sleep, not unconscious, just returned on and beneath the floor. The stone had gone dark once more, but this time there was no hum, no tremor, no breath, only stillness. It had been sealed again, but Marla's hands wouldn't stop shaking, because deep in the trees, just once, faint as a sigh, she heard another crib wheel turn. They didn't speak for a long time. The ranger had collapsed by the hearth, rifle across his lap, head bowed in quiet disbelief. The storm had stopped completely. No wind, no snow, just the still, eerie calm that follows something irreversible. The forest outside had gone silent again, but it was a different silence now. Not the kind that waits for a breath, but the kind that follows one that won't return. Marla sat beside the crib, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the worn wood. The child hadn't stirred. It lay wrapped in layers of wool and age, the sigil on its chest now dark, the glow long gone. She watched the small chest rise and fall, slow and steady, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid of what it was. She felt sorrow. The dog was curled beside the crib, its breathing shallow. It had done what it was never meant to do, defy the seal, drag it across a continent of snow, and find anyone who might understand the danger in time. Marla reached out and stroked the dog's fur, her hand trembling. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew none of us would believe it until we saw it for ourselves." The ranger stood slowly, every movement heavy. His boots creaked across the floor as he knelt on the opposite side of the crib. He looked older now, like the night had taken years off his life, not in pain, but in weight. The weight of knowing. He looked at Marla with the hollow clarity of a man who had seen too much to ever see the world the same again. "What happens now?" he asked. Marla didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were on the child, whose face had softened in rest. The runes beneath the cabin were still. The stones had cooled. It had worked, at least for now. "We stay quiet," she said. "We don't tell the next people, not because they wouldn't believe us, but because they might." The ranger gave a dry, bitter smile at that. He understood. The seal had been broken once, a fracture in something older than names, and the child, the lock, was not just a defense, but a message, one that would always return in another form if the ground stirred again. He looked toward the doorway, where the frame hung crooked, the wood still blackened with rot from whatever had pressed against it. "We should burn the place," he muttered. "Make sure no one ever comes back." But Marla shook her head. "Fire doesn't destroy what's underneath this place. It's part of the seal too now. Like everything above it had to play a role." They both looked at the mirror shards scattered across the floor, reflecting nothing now but their own weary forms. The being they'd seen, the one that could only exist in the reflection, was gone, or perhaps no longer interested, because the balance had been restored. For now dawn came hours later, with a pale gray light that washed over the cabin in the forest like a sigh. No birds sang, no birds sang, no branches creaked, but there was a stillness to the snow that felt earned. Peace, not pause. The ranger packed in silence, methodical and slow. He didn't ask Marla to come with him, and she didn't offer. They both knew she wouldn't leave, not yet. Not until the dog had closed its eyes for the last time. Not until she was sure the child would never wake in a world that hadn't yet learned how to protect it. When he stood at the door, he turned back once. "I'll come back in spring," he said. "If you're still here." She nodded. "I will be." He hesitated. "You're not afraid?" She looked down at the child in the crib, still wrapped in silence, and then at the dog curled beside it like a sentinel carved from bone and frost. "I was," she said. "But not anymore. Not of the child. Not of the thing beneath. I'm only afraid we'll forget." The ranger gave a slow nod. Then he stepped out into the morning light and vanished into the tree line. Marla stood in the doorway a while after he'd gone, watching the forest. Everything looked normal again, but nothing ever would be. She turned back, walking quietly to the crib. The baby's eyelids fluttered once, then stilled. The seal was sleeping again. Not just within the child, but within the story. Within memory. And memory had to be guarded. She reached into the shelf by the hearth and pulled out a blank notebook. Old, leather-bound. She flipped to the first page, her hands steady now. The pen touched paper. This is what happened. She would write every detail, every hour, every sound in the walls. She would write about the dog and the seal, about the mirror and the stone. She wouldn't try to explain it, only to preserve it, because someday someone else might see a crib in the snow, dragged by something silent and desperate, and they would need to know that not all children cry, and not all silence is peace. The fire crackled to life again. The dog gave a final sigh and rested its head gently against the crib leg. The snow outside began to melt in thin rivulets under the warming sun. Marla kept writing, and the woods, for now, held their breath.